象が全て定められていたとしたらどうだろう。人生におけるあらゆる選択、些細なものから大事なものまで選んでいるのではなく選ばされているとしたらどうだろう。無限の可能性などというものは幻想で、人はどれだけあがこうとも定められた道の上から降りられない。止める者は止めるように、貧しき者は飢えるように、善人は善人として、悪人は悪人として、美しき者、醜き者、強き者、弱き者、幸福な者、不幸な者、そして勝つ者、負ける者、すべて初めからそうなるように、それ以外のものにはなれぬように定められていたとしたらどうだろう。ならばどのような咎人にも罪はなく、聖人にも徳などない。何事も己の意志で決めたのではなく、そうさせられているだけだとしたら、ただ流されているだけだとしたら、問うが諸君がそれでよしとするのか。モテる者らはただ与えられただけに過ぎない虚構の玉座に満足か。持たざる者らは一片の罪とがなしに虐げられて許せるか。いいな、断じていいな。それを知った上で笑える者など、生きるということの意味を忘れた劣等種、人とは呼べぬ奴隷だろう。気の抜けた勝利の酒ほど今日のそげるものはない。運命とやらに舐めさせられる敗北ほど耐え難い苦渋はない。このような屈辱を、このような茶番劇をただ繰り返し続けるのが人生。よし、私はあがき抜こう。どこまでもどこまでも道が終わるまで歩き続ける。はるか果てに至った場所まで、私は私だけのオペラを作る。ゆえに諸君らの力を借りたい。虐げられ、踏みつぶされ、今まさに殺されんとしている君ら、ひととき同胞だった者たちよ。諸君らは敗北者として生まれ、敗北者として死に続ける。その運命を呪うのならば、私のもとに来るが100度繰り返しても勝てぬのならば、1000度繰り返し戦えばよい。1000度繰り返しても勝てぬのならば、万度繰り返し戦えばよい。未来永劫、永遠に勝つまで戦い続けることを誓えばよい。それができるというならば、諸君らが術の一部となることを許可しよう。英語勝つために。獣の盾が、その一本一本が諸君らの血肉で編まれることを祝福しよう。今はまだ私も君ら、そして彼も忌々しい輪の内ではあるもの。これからさ、ここでの選択が真に意味あるものであったと思えるように、いつかはきっとこの無限に続く輪を壊せるように。さあどうする諸君ら、この時代の敗北者たちよ。私に答えを聞かせてくれ。戦うか否か。
Greetings, one and all, to the most cursed, most cringiest corner of the internet. A YouTube channel content creator actively alienating everyone in both the analog and digital world. Well, welcome and good evening, you wonderful dice of all alignments. I am Lunar D8, May 1st, 1945. Berlin, Germany. 12:27 a.m. The closing act of the Second World War was the manifestation of total war, such as had never been seen before. No, the term carnage would have been more appropriate. Outmanned in every way, Berlin stood in complete isolation, slipping towards the crevice of annihilation. The nearly 500,000 troops marching under the banner of the Red Army had already surrounded the capital, making escape virtually impossible. Guns roared, mingling with the screams of the dying in an incessant cacophony of terror as the city was razed and its people massacred. Bloodshed, carnage, all in order to eradicate the enemies of this world, be they young or old, man or woman. Justice, revenge, love, peace, oppression, liberty, equality. The slogan one chose to attach to the horror made little difference. The chaos engulfing the bloody streets demonstrated quite readily the atrocities that would manifest when man was presented with a convenient higher cause to justify them with. Yes, for example, in this corner of the city, a blinding light flashed, followed by a roaring explosion. This latest bombardment sent even more soldiers, at least 3 whose silhouettes were still recognizably human, to their deaths, spreading their remains across the pavement. Bastards! Letting out a loud curse, a man leapt out of the trenches with Panzerfaust in hand. Protected by the covering fire of his allies, Schmeisses, he dashed over into effective firing range. He rose to his knees, took aim, and pulled the trigger. And firing a heat warhead, the projectile shot forward, smashing right into the flank of a tank. Its armor dissolved in accordance with the Newman effect, and the tank imploded in a torrent of liquefied metal and 1,000-degree flames. The man tossed aside his Panzerfaust, backed by comrades from behind, started cleaning up his remaining foes with his Mauser. Such was war. It allowed no time for idle thoughts. Only slaughter, murder, and bloodshed. No man could keep his sanity in this hell, and so the perpetrators of this chaos howled and raged, never looking back, revealing in boundless insanity to keep their blood afire. Within this flaming wasteland of gunplay, soldiers single-mindedly continued their murderous dance as if it was some ungodly ritual. Of course, in reality, it was all but child's play, soldiers against soldiers, rifles against pistols. No matter how fiercely they fought on this battlefield, the outcome of this war was already set in stone. The Third Reich had crumbled, the ambitions of its visionary leader lost in the flames of war. What remained on that tattered battlefield was the shaken remnants of the defeated, and the mob of the victors, flocking like vultures to the smell of decaying flesh. Certain death, inescapable defeat. Any attempt to retaliate was merely a self-serving act of revenge, with no hope of salvation. The situation had surpassed anything that might elicit notions of despair, transforming into no more than an absurd comedy of sorts. And yet, His heart beat still. His hand gripped steel. He would not stop so long as there were enemies to kill. For it was his sworn duty. If there existed even one thing, anything at all to justify this hellfire, be it sheer insanity, then by itself that would have been a blessing in disguise. Honor and glory debased and disgraced, worth less than pig shit, and yet human life remained the cheapest currency. That was reality. Is this all that's left of us? After wiping out all leftover foes and regrouping with his comrades, it dawned upon the man that there were only 3 of them left standing, himself included. The company tasked with protecting this block had been completely annihilated. The situation was anything but promising, and still more enemies were on their way. What about our Panzerfaust? You just used the last one, Master Sergeant. This is the end for us. The war is lost. The young man flashed a bitter smile as he handed over his Schmeister to the other. The older man glared at him but offered no more in the way of reproach. The war is lost, indeed. That was the bitter truth of it. Berlin had fallen, the company massacred, and the remaining 3 soon to join them. Well, not that it matters at this point. Let's turn down the volume. I think the music's a bit loud. Well, not that it matters at this point. Would be nice if we could at least go out with a bang, though. It's not like we've anywhere to flee. Your name, soldier? Joachim Brona. What about you, sir? Walter Gillitz. I suppose we'd all rather know the names of the men we'll be dying with. You there. The Master Sergeant Walter Gillitz directed his gaze at the final survivor of the company. A young boy, who had remained thus far, remained silent. Your name? The boy's eyes darting as he failed to hide his shock. Was even younger than Joachim, barely in his teens. If Walter had a son, he might have been around the same age. Marco Schmidt, sir. I see. Walter was about to ask what a mere child was doing there, but ultimately swallowed his words. It was a foolish question. The enemy would show no mercy to them, not even to children. The reason for it was very clear. They were the bitter enemies of the Red Army, the despised members of the Schutzstaffel. Even if they were to surrender, the Soviets were doubtlessly uninterested in taking them as prisoners. As such, fighting to their last breath was the only option left to them. Walter was certain that Joachim was ready to give his life for fatherland. The boy, on the other hand, what will become of Berlin? No, of Germany after the war is over. And what of our friends and families? You're asking the wrong man. It's always the same shit. The victors will paint us as inhuman monsters and mete out whatever justice they deem appropriate. Give me a break. Joachim shed his disaffected act, the bitter tone in his voice making it his true position on the situation clear. My mother and sister lived in Dresden, but they got caught in the bombing. Never so much was found as a piece of them. And they call us monsters? Ridiculous. We were merely fighting to protect our fatherland, and yet those bastards. Who the hell do they think they are? He would never surrender, yet even if he gave his life in the battle to come, the outcome of the war had already been decided. Nothing could change that, least of all himself. With this defeat, their fatherland and their descendants would. A single soldier was powerless to alter the great current of war. Joachim tried to express his dissatisfaction with that reality as best he could, with Marco silently listened. So I have nothing else left, at least. Several rifle shots echoed from their left just then. Walter and Marco just barely managed to duck into the corner. But Joachim was not so fortunate. His head was shot clean off by the first wave, followed by an entire volley of bullets being unloaded into his chest. Pelted by machine gun fire, Joachim's body contorted in a queer manner almost reminiscent of some form of dance, before finally hitting the ground. An anticlimactic finale, indeed, for the youth who had only moments prior expressed his desire to fight to the bitter end. But such was the reality of the situation, the reality of war. There were no heroes here, no messiahs, or miracles to save them, only men dying like insects. And should one allow his soul to be overcome by wrath or despair when confronted with this knowledge, it would serve only to invite the jaws of death to consume him next. The chaos of war would not tolerate idle thoughts. Knowledge of one's duty was all that was necessary. Schmidt! Answer me, Schmidt! As Walter rolled into the safety of a ruined building, he shouted the name of his lone surviving comrade with all the strength he can muster. I'm going to turn the volume down just a tiny bit more. It sounds great, but it's so loud. But instead of words, the sole reply he received was yet another flash, followed by a fiery explosion. The upper half of the young boy's body was flung at Walter's feet. The cramped alleyway was heavy, with the stench of blood and scorched entrails. Walter powerlessly dropped to his knees in the vast sea of blood. Sergeant Major, forgive me for not being of more use. Marco smiled even as the last embers of his life faded away. It was unbelievable someone could still form words in such a state as this. Walter took the boy's hand. I don't want to die. If I die here, then what have we been fighting for? All this time. Sir, please tell me, are we monsters? Berlin and Germany? You mustn't talk. As the gunfire continued, a brand new tank rolled onto the battlefield. Marco Schmidt was beyond help. Not even God could save him now. And so Walter's rightful place now was on the battlefield, his hand clutching a gun, and not the hand of a dying soldier. His ears lent not to the naive parting remarks of a boy, but straining to hear the breathing of his enemy. He knew that better than anyone, and yet, have we committed sins? Does this make this our punishment? I know there is no pride in war and murder, but we, Joachim, Walter, and so many other German soldiers just like them, had done nothing more than take up arms to protect their fatherland and loved ones. Was that truly a sin? Surrounded by the flames of the dying capital, the young boy spoke in mere disjointed fragments, voicing a question Walter himself would have loved to pose to the heavens above. Most likely. Yet after mere seconds of doubt, Walter answered curtly, "Waging war is no sin. Losing a war is." Such was the way of the world. A cruel, bitter truth. Walter found within himself a growing resentment for the Lord. I see. I'd like to win our next one, then. Marco Schmidt then quietly passed away in Walter's arms, the man gazing up at the heavens, the young soldier's smile in death, albeit tainted with blood and mud, still held traces of boyhood. Worry not, Schmidt Bronner. A bitter smile, mirroring Marco's, crept onto Walter's face. We will claim the next one. If not, then the next one, or the one after that. Even if we are doomed to repeat this outcome a million times before knowing victory. His words might have seemed the ramblings of a lunatic, beset by the armies of death, but they were more than that. Walter cocked his Schmeisser, confirmed it was loaded, then charged out of the ruined building into the open. They really went hard with the music. It's nice, it was so loud. It was everyone at the start of the video was like, "Oh my god, it's so loud, I can't hear anything." It's good music though. And it's probably better than listening to me talk. He unconsciously let out a battle cry, loud enough that it threatened to rend his throat. Would he end up gunned down like Joachim? Or share the same fate as Marco? It hardly mattered anymore. Either way, he'd merely die a miserable death befitting this miserable war. His mind was occupied by such despaired thoughts, and no way could he have predicted what was to come next. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Grant them eternal rest, O Lord, and my everlasting light shine upon them. It was his soldier's intuition that drove Walter to reflexively take shelter. His vision was drowned out by a blinding white light, and an explosion so fierce it dwarfed all previous bombardments. An explosion that seemed to rip apart the very heavens. Walter realized that this explosion was far beyond the level of any weapon that could have possibly been employed in urban warfare. What in the world? Again, the music is really good. Had happened. The city he had literally staked his life to protect had been reduced to a charred wasteland. Although it took quite a while for Walter to regain his sight and hearing, there was still not enough time for him to make sense of the situation. Part of him wondered if it was all a sick joke. Only one thing was clear. Both his allies' corpses and the encroaching enemy troops had been annihilated. No bombing raid could have inflicted such immense damage, and although Walter had managed to survive the attack itself, his resulting wounds were deep. Pieces of steel and concrete, blasted in his direction by the explosion, had pierced his back and flank. The hand that once held his Schmeisser was blown off from the elbow. It wasn't even worth the effort to attempt to discern the number of more minor injuries. His incessant bloody vomit told him that he had also suffered severe internal damage. He would not make it. Walter swore blindly, no longer certain of the target of his indignation. Just then the voice from before rang out again. Hear my prayer, O Lord. To you, all flesh shall come. Return unto thy rest, O my soul, for the Lord hath dealt bountifully with thee. It was a requiem. It was a requiem offered up to fallen soldiers. One sung in a beautiful voice. Not even a prestigious church choir could produce a melody quite this dignified. Yet all the same time, the scorn seeping into the voice was all too evident. Only upon the eve of the apocalypse itself could such a voice be conceived of as an angel's. It sung of the dead with scorn, ridicule, and mockery, deriving the utmost pleasure in trampling upon every last remnant of the dignity they possessed. The voice of a destroyer, intoxicated by mayhem. This was the product of a black mind, possessed solely by an inhuman malice. Grant them eternal rest, O Lord, and may everlasting light shine upon them. And so, stepping onto the vast expanse of the debris, the destroyer appeared, that demonic requiem at his lips. It was a young boy, lacking in years, even in comparison to Marco, with a face so delicate that a careless glance could easily mistake his features for that of a girl's. A single look at the boy was enough to give Walter chills. His teeth began to chatter. Although he had lost a considerable amount of blood and his vision had grown hazy, the reason behind the freezing chill at his back lay elsewhere. The sheer enmity and pain radiating from the boy's visage indeed contributed to that. But to Walter, the most dreadful thing was the fact that he knew that face.